On. Whoops, it's on. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Would you please take your seats so we can begin our meeting? Thanks to the staff for not scheduling this for 8 o'clock in the morning. This is a rare C-hearing section meeting that is not meeting at 8 o'clock, but at a more decent hour, 10 o'clock, to give travelers an opportunity to get here without having to come the day beforehand. So once again, thanks to the staff for all of that consideration. For those of you who don't know me, and some of you may not, I'm David Pierce, the current chairman of the C-hearing section, and to my right is Melissa Yoon, who is the staffer who deals with all of our C-hearing issues for the section, and on my left is Jeff Kalin, who is chair of the advisory panel. You have before you our agenda. Is there any other business that section members would like to identify at this time? All right, I have just one piece of other business that shouldn't take much time, and that's a brief discussion of amendment number 5 and the recent decision by NOAA Fisheries relative to what was approved and disapproved in amendment number 5, an amendment that this section has heard presented in great detail by council staffer Lori Steele at least twice. So it's of interest to all of us, so I'll give you a brief update on that. And by the way, I should point out, too, that we have Amanda. Amanda, I don't know your last name. I'm sorry. Okay. Amanda is here for Joe, who is on some other assignment, I assume. He's okay health-wise? Good. Okay. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you very much for your transaction, eventual transaction, the translation of all of this discussion into detailed minutes. All right, so with no objection to the agenda as you have before you, we will adopt it by consent. All right, so it is adopted. Approval of the proceedings from May 2013. I assume everyone has had a chance to look it over. Is there any discussion on the proceedings of our last meeting in May? All right, so is there a motion to approve those proceedings? I see a motion from Pat Augustine, seconded by Bill Adler. I assume there is no objection to that motion. I see none. Therefore, the minutes, the proceedings are adopted. Public comment. As always, we offer the audience an opportunity to comment on issues related to management of the sea-herring fishery, issues that we will not be discussing today. So if there's anything new relative to sea-herring that the public would like to address at this time, issues that are not germane, not applicable to addendum number 6, which of course is what we're going to act upon today, then please raise your hand and I will recognize you.
You want me to comment in public about my issue, or you want me to do it at the end of the meeting from here?
And that's fine, at the end. Yeah. All right. On to draft addendum 6 for final approval. We all are aware that we have already adopted a draft addendum with a number of measures, most of which, if not all of them, have been proposed through the addendum to complement what was done by the New England Fishery Management Council. Actually, more than that, we have some of the action actually is specific to section consideration and not the council. We have final action to take on that draft addendum, so I will turn to Melissa and ask her to summarize the comments that we received at our hearings, and also, of course, to describe for our benefit the options themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will now go over draft addendum 6 to the Interstate Atlantic Herring Fishery Management Plan. So at this point, the draft addendum has gone out for public comment with a public comment period that ended on July 19th. We are now at the final step, section review and consideration for final approval. So as a quick review, draft addendum 6 complements the New England Fishery Management Council's Framework Adjustment 2. The Council submitted Framework 2 to NOAA Fisheries, which parallels the 2013 to 2015 specifications. The framework authorizes the Council to split annual catch limits seasonally for Area 1A and 1B during specifications process. It also establishes a policy for annual carryover of up to 10% of unutilized subquota under specific conditions. The Council proposed new accountability measures to close the directed fishery when 92% of the sub-ACL is reached, and then close the stock-wide fishery when 95% of the total ACL is reached. So on August 2nd, last Friday, NIMS published the proposed rule for the Council's recommendations. There is a 30-day comment period ending on September 3rd. So this map shows the 4 management areas for Atlantic herring. Currently, the interstate FMP has a trip limit trigger and seasonal splitting provisions for Area 1A, but not for areas 1B, 2, and 3. There are no provisions for quota rollover for the 4 management areas. Therefore, the draft addendum was necessary for consistent provisions across the management areas. In February 2013, the Commission's Atlantic herring section set annual catch limits for 2013 through 2015 seasons at just under 108,000 metric tons. This is an 18% increase from 2010 to 2012 limits. This new stockwise specification is identical to the ACLs adopted by the Council. So there are 4 issues proposed in Draft Addendum 6. Issue 1 proposes seasonal splitting for areas 1B, 2, and 3. Option 1, status quo, is to not allow seasonal splitting for these additional areas. Seasonal splitting will still be allowed for area 1A. Option 2 is to allow states to seasonally split the sub-ACLs in all management areas to maximize the value to Atlantic herring fisheries. The actual splits can be set as part of the specifications process. Issue 2, quota rollover for all areas. Option 1, status quo. No quota rollover for management areas 1B, 2, and 3. Area 1A will continue to have a rollover provision of unused quota to remaining periods in the fishing year. Option 2, to allow for up to 10% of unused quota in the management area to carry over to the first fishing season with landings data, provided that the total ACL is not exceeded. Under this provision, under this option, the following provisions will also apply. All harvest control measures would continue to apply to stock-wide and sub-ACLs. All carryovers would be based on initial sub-ACL allocation for the fishing year. Sub-ACL carryovers will only be authorized if the total ACL for the fishing year is not exceeded. Provisions for carryovers, including percentages and amounts, can be modified in the future through Atlantic herring specifications process, in addition to framework adjustments and amendments. And unused quota may be rolled from one season to the next within the fishing year. Issue 3, trip limit triggers for all areas. Option 1, status quo, is no trip limit triggers for areas 1B, 2, and 3. The directed fishery in Area 1A will reduce to a 2,000-pound bycatch allowance if 95% of the sub-ACL is reached. Option 2, establish a trigger to close directed fisheries in the management area when 92% of the sub-ACL is reached, and then close the stock-wide fishery when 95% of the total ACL is reached. A 2,000-pound bycatch allowance will then continue when the directed fishery is closed. Issue 4 is the specification process. Status quo is to use the addendum process to change sub-ACL triggers. Option 2 is to use the annual specification process to set triggers. So those are the options in Draft Addendum 6. I will go right through to the summary of public comments at this point. So the document went out for public comment on July 19th, as I mentioned earlier. We had 3 public hearings in New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. A total of 3 participants, not including staff, attended those meetings, 0 in 2 of those meetings. We didn't receive any written comments, and there was general support for the alternative options, the options 2 for each of the 4 issues proposed. So staff also held conference calls with the technical committee and advisory panel. Their reports are included in the briefing materials. The TC chair is not here today, so I will sum up the TC's input. There was general support for alternative options, option 2 for all 4 issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Questions for Melissa? All right, then we'll go on to Jeff Keelan, who will provide the advisory panel report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Melissa, for putting this together. There was a conference call on July 22nd. I'm not sure we had a quorum, but there were several interested advisors on the call. Similar to the recommendations of the technical committee, the AP supported option 2 for seasonal splitting, which allows for seasonal splitting. Option 2, which allows for quota rollover in year 3. And option 2 concerning harvest control measures will close at 92%. There were some comments from AP members about asking why a 92% trip limit trigger is necessary, since the 95% trigger has worked since implementation in 2009 for Area 1. We've gone to weekly reporting. Excuse me, I think we're daily reporting. I think that's a mistake. We report daily in the fishery, and the 92% was obviously an extra safety measure, an extra layer of precaution against closures. The AP noted that in recent years, or overages rather, the AP noted that in recent years there have been overages for Area 1A's quotas, but they were minimal, under 5%, and accountability measures are already in place to reduce the quota accordingly for the following year. It's actually year 3. So, you know, it was just a comment, we have gone to daily reporting, and I think people in the industry are concerned that it still takes 6 months to figure out how much was caught, given the fact that we've gone to daily reporting. The AP also supported option 2 concerning the specification process for sub-ACL triggers, and that ends my report. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Jeff? Pat? Before you do that, Pat, I wanted to make note of the fact that Jeff Keelan has a new role and new responsibility. For those of you who may not know, he has been appointed to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. Therefore, he'll no longer be in the audience. He'll be at the table and likely will be involved in many of the discussions and debates that the New England Council has in concert with the Mid on sea herring management rules, as well as, of course, mackerel. So welcome aboard, Jeff, in that new capacity. It's well-deserved. All right, if there are no questions for Jeff, then I guess Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had one question. If multi-year specifications are set in herring, which they are for 3 years, and there's an underage in one area, and you allow 10% to be carried over, but the other 2 areas max out on their sub-ACLs, essentially you forego the opportunity to carry over the underage because you can't exceed the total ACL. Is that correct?
I'll turn to the chair of the New England Council. Doug, can you answer that question? I'll punt that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to. What it is if there's an underage in one particular area, but the overall ACL, the stock-wide ACL, has been utilized, then you're right, the overage would not be able to be, the underage would not be able to be rolled over in that particular management area. It's only if there's an underage also in the overall stock-wide ACL that you can roll over underages in a sub-ACL.
All right. Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Jeff. Where you didn't have a quorum, is that something that has taken place in prior meetings and phone calls? Probably should know that, but I don't remember. And if so, is there something we should be doing to, reinvigorate our advisors?
I don't think it is the first time it's happened, but in this case, this is sort of a non-controversial measure, so I don't think we've lost much. I think what we've done in the past is bring everyone's comments to you, even if we haven't had a quorum, and I don't really know personally and looked at the list or see if it should be repopulated, but I would think if we don't have anybody participating for 2 or 3 meetings, maybe there's an ASMFC policy about repopulating the AP. But in this case, it was unanimity, I think, and again, not a lot of controversy. So this one went pretty smoothly. But I get your point.
Yeah, the lack of attendance at the public hearings, I think, supports what Jeff just said. In my particular case, I traveled to Gloucester for our public hearing, and I was able to talk to staff about other issues since no one was in attendance. So, again, non-controversial addendum, which makes our job a bit easier, at least today. Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug Grout and I also had an interesting hearing as the only attendees. We talked about a lot of other things. Regarding, I have a couple things. The first one, I think maybe it's a question for our parliamentarian when we meet, I think it's Thursday morning, about whether a group such as the advisors, or Jeff encountered, whether that group can bring their comments to the board as a group, being that they didn't have consensus. It's questionable about whether comments could be made if you don't have a majority. Second thing, a more important thing, is it's probably self-evident, but what is the plan for if we go to dividing up or setting up the new arrangement for 1B, 2, and 3? Would the states just opt in? Would we have a session where we say we'll go be part of the 1B group and part of the 2 group, 3 group? Because we know in 1A it's New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. So how would that work?
Regarding your last point, I suspect that we'll have to have some discussion as to what states would want to be involved in a similar arrangement that the states of New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts have with Area 1A. We haven't yet discussed that particular issue. We can bring it up today if anyone cares to. Perhaps under other business, I'll ask if there is any interest on the part of the states in being part of subgroups, so to speak, where they would get together to discuss similar situations, similar days off, for example, and other measures that might be appropriate for those particular areas. And with regard to your first point, I would suggest that what Jeff has brought forward are just general discussions of opinions expressed by those advisors who were present. No motions were made. So because no motions were made, it doesn't reflect, we're not faced with having to deal with a formal position established by the advisors. Jeff?
Yeah, maybe we've just operated by consensus, and if there has not been consensus, we've been careful to make sure that everyone's comments to the contrary have been noted, but we don't take motions. There are no motions. There's no real parliamentary procedure that we pursue. On the splitting of 2 and 3, just because I'm in the business, I'll tell you that there's no interest in the industry to split 2 or 3, so I don't think the board needs to get too excited about setting up the kind of situation we have in the Gulf of Maine. It was just an option that was put on the table early in the process to try to stretch out the Area 2 quota specifically, and then there seemed to be some utility in Area 1B, but the people that are working in Area 2 are not interested in splitting 2, so particularly now that we have additional fish being allocated into the area. So that's just a comment from me as someone who's knowledgeable about what people are thinking. and that is not to split two.
Yeah, regarding the splitting of the areas and the possible arrangement of different states to take advantage of, well, to make the break within the areas, perhaps under option 2 specification process for the sub-ACL triggers. Option 2 would provide us with the opportunity, not necessarily today, but at some future meeting during the annual specification process to determine what states will be involved in those decisions related to those specific areas. All right, anything else? Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On one of these things here, it says that when the entire, or when the quota gets taken, the whole fishery will close down. Is that the way it is now? I'm thinking in terms of, and maybe it's never happened, that the whole quota for the whole world has been taken to the point where everything would close down, even if one area hasn't reached its quota, like let's say 1A didn't. They're doing their thing and they're there, and everybody else in 2, 3, 1B takes a lot. Does that mean that the whole fishery gets closed down? And had that, I don't think this ever happened, but I don't think is that the way it is now, or is that a new idea?
Well, the way it is now would be under option 1 for 3.3. And we decided, or at least we may decide through this addendum, to go in the different direction that is described in option 2. Any additional questions? Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Not so much a question as it is a comment. In general, I support all the measures in option 2 for each of the sections, but I do want to highlight to the entire section the great amount of work that the states of Maine, New Hampshire, and the Commonwealth have put into micromanaging Area 1A. Over the years, we've met a lot. Areas 1B and 3 have cross-cutting interest to all of our states, so I think we need to think very carefully about how we move forward should this addendum be approved today.
Pat?
You ready for a motion, Mr. Chairman? I think we answered most
certainly.
of the questions. The one question I have was the one that was answered by our technical committee. Jeff did a good job in explaining what the industry's position was and concern about that one item where you thought there might be a period of time of confusion. You said 6 months to iron something out. It was under specification process for subchapters. I think you said at the end of your report that there was some discussion or concern about clarity of how that would be set out. You said you thought it would take something like, use the
Well,
term,
Pat, if you look at
6 months.
if you look at the report under 3.3, it says, there's a comment that some people on the call were questioning why we need to go to 92, because we've already gone to daily reporting in this fishery, and people are having a hard time understanding why it takes 6 months to figure out what we've caught now that we've gone to daily reporting. And the 6 months comes from, I think, actually language in the specification document that I just read this morning, where the justification for not allowing the overage in year 2, but instead requiring that the overage not occur, the underage doesn't occur until year 3, is because the agency's saying it takes 6 months to figure out how much has been caught. And the point that I made for the AP was that people are wondering why it still takes 6 months when we've gone to daily reporting, because we're all trying to get to real-time management. So a little bit of an editorial comment, but it was consistent with the issue that was raised on the phone, I think.
Right, so I understand why you selected option 2. Thank you.
I'm ready when you are, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought it was a lively discussion and cleared up some points that we all had some concern about. I move the board approve for final addendum 6 with the following options. Management options 3.1, seasonal splitting of quotas for areas 1B, 2, and 3. Option 3.1.2, option 2, allow states to seasonally split the sub-ACLs in all management areas to maximize value to the Atlantic herring fisheries. The actual splits, amount, or percentages by months, trimesters, or seasons would be set as part of the specification process. Under 3.2, quota rollover for all management areas, option 3.2.2, option 2, allow for up to 10% of unused quota in a management area to carry over to the first fishing year after final landings data are available within that same management area, provided that the ACL is not exceeded for the entire fishery. The stock-wide ACL will not be changed from the annual specification. This adjustment for areas with unused quota is intended to provide some flexibility to the fishing industry. Furthermore, unused quota in one period may be rolled over to the next period within the same fishing year. Under 3.3, harvest control measures, trip limit triggers. Option 3.3.2, option 2. This option establishes triggers to close directed fisheries in a management area when 92% of the sub-ACL is projected to be reached, and then close the stock-wide fishery when 95% of the total ACL is projected to be reached. A 2,000-pound bycatch allowance will continue when the directed fishery is closed. Under 3.4, specification process for sub-ACL triggers, 3.4.2, option 2. Sub-ACL's triggers will be set using the annual specification process.
All right, we have a motion which basically is option 2 for sections 3.1 through 3.4.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
correct.
Thank you, Pat. Is, Terry,
Yeah, I'm seconding it with the comment that he broke the Dr. Pierce rule.
I was going to comment.
Egregiously.
I was going to say that, but I appreciated the detail with which Pat, the detail that Pat has given us relative to what exactly we are approving. So I violated the Pierce rule many times already, so I may as well let Pat do it. So option 2 for all of those sections 3.1 through 3.4. Is there a second to the motion? All right, Terry has seconded the motion. Let's see, I assume there might be a need to caucus amongst the states. Perhaps not. All right, while the states are caucusing, I will go to the audience. Does anyone care to comment on the motion? I see none. I assume that everyone has, all the states are now in agreement as to whether the motion should be approved? Are you all set in New York? Okay. Richie?
Would it make sense to clarify the motion in that you're taking a lot of what Pat said out of the motion? Would it make sense
Well-
to kind of read the final motion?
You really want me to read the final motion? Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. All right, so here we have another take on Pat's motion, and it is the correct take.
Oh, they're not finished yet.
I'm still working on it. All right, I will read the motion, and Pat, you can then tell us whether this is the motion you have made. All right,
Did you
the
want
motion,
to include the word final, or is it assumed it's final?
well, actually, I suggest that we vote on this motion, and then I will entertain another motion that would be to adopt the addendum itself, okay? Right now, we're just approving the specific options within the document itself, okay?
See if I can read it. That's all.
All right, so the motion is to move to approve 3.1 season splitting of quota for, hold on a second. Let me rewind. I don't, I think this is a bit more complicated than it needs to be. Nevertheless, because once I read this, it belongs to the section, so. Still doesn't look right. Uh, That doesn't look right. Tony, I think the first line is wrong. You're missing, okay, it's in there now, all right. All right. Move to approve 3.1 seasonal splitting of quota for areas 1B, 2, and 3. It still doesn't read right. Rewind again. Yeah, you've got this, it doesn't read right. It's got too many approves. All right, I think we have got it. Move to approve section 3.1 seasonal splitting of quota for areas 1B, 2, and 3, option 2. Under section 3.2, quota rollover for all management areas, option 2. For section 3.3, harvest control measures, trip limit triggers, option 2. For section 3.4, specification process for sub-ACL triggers, option 2. That's the motion by Mr. Augustine and seconded by Mr. Stockwell. Is that your motion, Paul?
Yes,
Pat?
Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. All right, everyone has had an opportunity to caucus. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your hand. All right. Any opposition to the motion? All right, the motion is approved. Now I look for a motion to adopt the addendum with the options that we have selected. Hold on one. Doug?
I think before we go to final approval, we have to determine an implementation date for this. And I would make a motion that the implementation date be January 1, 2014.
All right, we have a motion that the implementation date for the addendum be January 1 of 2014. Is there a second to the motion? That would be Bill Adler. Discussion on the motion. Seems to be an adequate enough time for all states to do what needs to be done to get this addendum in place. All right. Is there a need for caucus? You can ask it from here. All right, we have a question.
I pretend I'm over there. If you don't implement this until 2014, from the perspective of the states, what happens to the additional quota that's available in 2013 under the specifications? Would that in any way slow down our ability to take the fish that would be allocated in 2013? And I wanted to raise this issue at the end of the meeting. My specific concern is, right now, Area 2 is closed. We took 22,000 tons out of Area 2. The agencies telling us on the website that the fishery will not reopen in Area 2 until January 1 of 2014. However, if these specifications that were published are approved this summer or later this fall, there's 8,000 tons of herring that could be applied to Area 2 before the end of the calendar year. You understand what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman? So I wanted to raise that issue for the board later on, because right now, when our contacts with the agency, nobody understands that, it seems. And there's a potential for a fall fishery in Area 2 of several thousand metric tons if the specifications are approved. So my question is, if you delay implementation of this addendum until January 1 of 2014, would that in some way keep us from landing the additional herring in the states this fall if we can talk the agency into making the allocation into Area 2 the way we all expected it to go? You understand my question, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Doug and then Terry.
Well, the way I would read this, this particular addendum is providing options for the states to seasonally split quotas, change the triggers to roll over. It doesn't say that we're implementing any of these three things. We would then have to, through a follow-up specifications process, implement some of these particular measures. So I don't think, from a federal standpoint, I think what they're going to do is the quotas and the sub-ACLs will be increased. But that doesn't have anything to do with this particular addendum. At least that's the way I see it.
Thank you. I just want to make that clarification.
It's a good point raised by Jeff and a good response from Doug. The ASMFC, the sea herring section, is ahead of the New England Council and the National Marine Fisheries Service in terms of the quotas that we adopted for all the different areas, 30,000, for example, for Area 1B. And also, this addendum puts us ahead of the federal government, the council as well, because it's a proposed rule right now by the federal government, which I anticipate will eventually be adopted as final. But we are ahead of the federal process. All right, Pat.
Yeah, to that point, so clarity on the question. What happened to the 3,000 ton? They're lost? In regard to what Jeff just said, I was trying to follow what Doug had said. If we adopt it, we don't adopt till January of 2014, but right now it's closed. And if those fish aren't going to be able to be taken, are they lost? How do you recapture them? Does the council going to allow that to happen? The 3,000 pounds we're talking about, the leftover, the area that's closed right now? I'm a little confused on it, so if someone just clarify that point. It sounds like fish are lost that are out there that are not going to be harvested and are not going to be able to get back. Is that true?
Yeah, Pat, the council, New England Council meets in September, and at that time, I suspect we will get the word from NOAA Fisheries regarding where they are with the framework, and I anticipate that by then or shortly thereafter, we will be able to get some word from the service as to whether or not they will reopen Area 2, because the quota will have been increased through that framework action. So that's what I expect. As chair of the section and as a member of the New England Council, and of course with Terry and Doug also as members of the New England Council, I suspect we'll push this point as well, just to make sure that no fish is left on the table. If the quota is increased, then fishermen should be allowed to take it. And I'll turn to Terry for additional comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You just made essentially the same comment I was going to make, but I have a friendly for Doug and Bill. That would be to insert by January 1st. In the event that the council is able to work with the agency to utilize that fish this fall, and part of it is also dependent upon the conversation we're going to have after the final vote on the process that we're going to use to get there. I think we need to spend some time on that.
Okay, Terry has made a suggestion for a friendly amendment. Doug, do you find it friendly? Okay. All right, very friendly. Therefore, if the motion would please be changed to reflect that suggestion from Terry. All right? All set, Terry? Okay. Any further comments on the motion? I see none. Any objection to the motion? No? All right, the motion, Bob?
Just on the motion, it reads a little strange, move to have the implementation date by January 1. I think, move to have the addendum implemented, on or before January 1, something like that may read a little better and convey, I think, what Terry's trying to do.
All right, we have a suggestion from the executive director. Sounds like a good one. Terry and Doug, thumbs up? All right. Therefore, let's change the motion to reflect that language. Is that what you had in mind, Bob? Okay, all right. So Bob has indicated that this would be a more sensible way to go, and I agree. Move to have the addendum implemented on or before January 1, 2014. Motion by Mr. Grout, seconded by Mr. Adler. I assume the seconder does not object to this change, okay? And the maker of the motion also feels comfortable with it? Okay. All right. If there's no objection to the motion, it will be approved. Okay. So motion is approved. Now I think we've come to, unless staff corrects me, I think now is time for us to take final action on the addendum. All right. Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve addendum 6 as amended.
We have a motion from Terry, seconded by Dennis Abbott, and that motion is to approve addendum 6 as amended. Is there a need for a caucus? I see no interest in that. All right. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your hand. Oh, that's right, it's a roll call. I'm sorry about that. It's a final action requires a roll call. So Melissa will call out the names, and please respond accordingly. Richie, question?
I think if you ask and there's no objection, you don't have to go through calling all the names.
Okay. Who called for the roll call? I thought it was staff, no? Okay, Bob.
Just the new procedure approved by the policy board was to have a record of the votes on all final actions. So if there's no objection, then the record would show that everybody in the room is in favor of approving this addendum for this instance. But if the board is split, then a roll call would be needed.
All right, thank you. So a roll call is not needed. All right. There is no objection. There is no objection to, all right, so there is a roll call. Good grief. All right, Melissa, if you would, please.
Maine?
Yes.
No?
All right. We'll rewind again. So, staff, would you please tell us if we need a roll call? It's a final action.
You will have a record of the votes, essentially a roll call vote if you ask and there's no objection, so that everybody in the room will have by default been in favor of this motion because there is no objection. So you have a roll call and a record of how everybody voted, but you don't need to go state by state. So it's a semantics thing, but it saves. It's supposed to save time. I don't think it is in this.
It's not saving time because it's confusing the heck out of me. All right, so we don't need a roll call.
If
There's no
if you
objection.
ask-
There's
yeah.
no objection to our not having a roll call? All right, so there's no objection to our not having a roll call. Therefore, I will assume that there is no objection to this motion. I see no objection to this motion. Therefore, the motion is approved. All right. Wow. Now we're on to other business. I indicated that what I wanted to do was touch base on amendment number 5. I certainly could turn to the chair of the C Hearing Committee of the New England Council, Doug Grout, for that update, but I don't think it's necessary. I'll just touch on a few things. First of all, the National Marine Fisheries Service has partially approved Amendment Number 5 to the Sea Herring Plan. And that amendment, if you recall, was developed to improve the catch monitoring program and to address bycatch issues in the fishery. Most of the measures in Amendment Number 5 were adopted, but some were not. And the service indicated there were specific reasons why, after public comment, they could not adopt all of the measures within the plan. They indicated that there were legal concerns regarding some of the options, some of the proposals, some of the decisions by the New England Council, some administrative concerns. To say the least, this partial approval has generated some consternation and some concern in some quarters. However, I'm first to admit that the service did indicate in the proposed rule for the amendment that they had serious concerns about some of the provisions in that amendment, and apparently after the public comment period had ended, they were convinced that they could not adopt all of the measures because of these legal concerns, administrative concerns, and the fact, according to the service, the New England Council did not provide enough justification for some of those measures. One of the key aspects of Amendment Number 5 was 100% observer coverage, with there being a cost sharing of observer costs, the industry paying for some of those costs. That was not adopted by the service. My understanding is the primary reason for that is that this strategy of cost sharing for observer costs cuts across many fisheries management plans, and the service has indicated that they have assembled a working group comprised of their own staff, the Northeast Fisheries Science Center staff, and the New England Council to come up with some strategy that would entail a workable and legal cost-sharing program regarding how observers would be paid for. That was their conclusion. For those of you who read Federal Register announcements, this one goes on forever, extremely detailed, and I compliment the National Marine Fisheries Service for the creativity and for the detail, the careful thought they put into these Federal Register announcements. They're fascinating reads. And frankly, much of the justification the service has offered up for their approval and for their disapprovals on their face sounds reasonable. This section will benefit from New England Council discussion of the partial approval of Amendment 5. This discussion will occur at the New England Council September meeting, when many more details will be provided, when we will have in our hands the actual final rule. I don't believe the final rule is out yet. We just have an announcement from the service as to what they've approved and what they have not approved. So I'm not going to go into any further detail. I don't believe there's any motion or action required by this section at this time. There may be at our next meeting, depending upon what the service provides for all of its rationale regarding the disapproval of some of these measures. So that's as far as I'm going to take a summary, an update of Amendment Number 5, and I'll turn to the section members to see if anyone else has anything else they would like to offer up on Amendment 5 issues. All right, I see none. Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, while the federal government's working on final things, what is the status right now of observer coverage and who pays for it right now? I mean, how does that work now?
Well, the industry does not pay for observer coverage. The observer coverage is paid for by the federal government to the extent that it can pay for that coverage. The number of trips by area, by a gear type that will be sampled in the upcoming year has already been determined by the service. It's not 100%. I suspect it's probably around 40 to 50%, something like that, but I would have to check the numbers. It's far short of 100%, which was the New England Council's desired coverage, with, again, the cost sharing for that observer coverage. This was one of the key issues of Amendment Number 5. Getting good information, accurate information regarding what actually is caught by the herring vessels, when they're pursuing that pelagic species. So they'll be at the September council meeting, I'm sure, concern expressed by the fishing industry, concern expressed by by many of the environmental organizations that have provided detailed comments on the partially approved measures and disapproved measures. So all that'll come out, that'll be described in great detail at that September council meeting. Yeah, Bill.
So in other words, right now, observer coverage is paid for by the government, not by the industry.
I believe that is correct. I got that right, Doug? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, the one element of this amendment number 5 that apparently was adopted was that whenever sea herring vessels, pier trawlers specifically, I guess, but maybe all vessel types, whenever they go into groundfish closed areas, there must be 100% observer coverage. And I assume that would be 100% observer coverage that would be paid by the federal government. So if observers are not available from the federal government, then the assumption would be that the vessels would not be allowed access into the closed areas. I got that right, Jeff?
Unfortunately, you do.
Okay, I've got that right. All right. All right, so the cost sharing aspect of this particular amendment was very important. And again, we'll get more details from the service when we meet in September. And the service has made it very clear in formal correspondence to the New England Fishery Management Council that this is a cross-cutting issue, mackerel, other fisheries, and from what I've read in this correspondence, NOAA Fisheries wants to get it right. All right. Anything else? Any other business for today's meeting? Okay. Bill.
So we can put off the discussion on what states are going to meet if they decide to do areas 1B, 2, and 3, like 1A is done. Remember, how do we work that one out? Is that going to come later?
I would suggest that all states contact Bob, Tony, Melissa, and let them know of your interest in becoming part of a group that would deal with splitting of the quota within these different areas, Area 2 and Area 3 and Area 1B. And I think it would be useful for Melissa to provide to all states the manner in which it is now handled by Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. So you'll all understand the gory details as to how difficult this can be when a subset of the different states meet to determine how to slow down catch within specific areas. So that's my suggestion, that the different states just contact ASMFC staff to make clear your intention. Bob?
I might suggest we go the other way. In other words, we'll have staff put together a white paper, some straw man document that looks at landings patterns in these areas and where those fish are going to when they're landed, and suggest states that seem logical. And I think the white paper or whatever straw man should have some consideration for what Terry mentioned earlier, which is the budget implications and the workload implications on those states. As you know all too well, David, the 3 northernmost states meet fairly regularly to deal with Area 1A, days out, and effort control. So maybe I think we can go from the staff level and put together something and bring that out to the states and see where your comfort level is with that. If that, it just seems maybe a better approach than piecemealing it through a lot of states contacting us.
Bob has offered up a suggested approach. I think it's a good one. I assume that all agree that that's the way to go, and we will go that way. Thank you, Bob, for that suggestion. All right. I've been reminded that the New England Council's Herring Committee will be meeting on September 19, and the advisory panel will be meeting on the 18th. So all those who are interested in the council discussions and advisors' input into herring discussions at our September council meeting and committee decisions that will be discussed at the council meeting in September. Well, now you know what those dates are. Any further comment? All right, I see no other business. With no objection, I will adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.